Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books author reading series. If you'd like to learn more about us and our many upcoming author events, please visit skylightbooks.com, where you can browse our inventory, buy books, and join our Friends with Benefits Club. You can also follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. To speak to a real live bookseller like me, please call 323-660-1175. Thanks for your support, and enjoy.
Thanks, Vanessa, and thank you all for coming along. I forgot to take the script out of my bag. The life-changing magic of decluttering in a post-apocalyptic world. As society collapses around us, and we cling to life among the ruins, it's more important than ever to have an organised and pleasant home in which to cower. Tidy surroundings will clear your mind and give you more time to focus on the important things in life, such as scavenging for food and protecting your home from giant insects. Keep only things that spark joy or will be useful. For example, a childhood toy that conjures happy memories, or an axe that could decapitate a homicidal robot. If an item does not spark joy, thank it and send it on its way. But do so very quietly so as not to attract the attention of the monstrous things beneath the earth. Don't feel you need to hold on to unwanted gifts. Quietly discarding them is easier than ever, now that the earth is covered with bottomless pits of sulphurous fire. Think how much easier it will be to fight off hordes of murderous reanimated skeletons, when you know that you'll be coming home to a drawer full of perfectly folded socks. This one's called Town Mouse. I think I shall pay a visit to Country Mouse. His backward ways never fail to make me feel better about myself. Ah, hello Hipster Mouse. What are you doing here? I'm Airbnb-ing Country Mouse's place while he's on holiday. Holiday? Yeah. He started a Simple Mouse vlog and lifestyle brand, which made millions. He's gone yachting with Super Rich Mouse. Well, Country Mouse is certainly moving up in the world. I'll call him. Perhaps I can join them. No answer. How odd. I'll try him again later. This one's called Marvello, the Amazing Grammar Mouse. Hello, Marvello. Shall we go and point out some amusing grammar mistakes? Oh, come on. Shall we go and point out some amusing grammar mistakes? Oh dear, Marvello seems a bit depressed. Still, I'm sure a few misplaced apostrophes and split infinitives will cheer him up. What's that, Marvello? You think you've wasted your life on a pointless and mean-spirited quest to embarrass those less educated than yourself? Haha, isn't Marvello a funny little mouse? This is called Some Alternative Voting Systems. Murder Mystery. Candidates are invited to spend a week in an isolated country house. Votes are cast every day, and by night whoever has the lowest number of votes is murdered in an unusual manner. Epic Fantasy. Candidates are taken to the realm of darkness where they're imprisoned in ice. Voters must defeat the undead, then use their ballot papers to make a fire and melt the ice of their chosen candidate. Magic Realism. Candidates are turned into cats who dance in the moonlight to a flute played by a 100-year-old woman. Ballot papers are thrown down a well, and the winner's name appears in an avocado. This one's called Failure. I am an abject failure. Better a failed fountain than a successful puddle, I suppose. Failure plays his trumpet at dawn, but success rides his bicycle through the woods at night. What? Failure is to success as a thimble is to a rhinoceros. Please stop now. This one's called Previously Unknown Final Chapters of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Chapters 31 to 35. Charlie attends various health and safety courses and management seminars. Chapter 36. Charlie fends off an aggressive takeover by Nestle. Chapter 37. Charlie renegotiates contracts with the Oompa Loompa unions. Chapters 38 and 39. Charlie diversifies into non-confectionery areas, increasing profits 2,000%. I think this is the last, well, maybe second last. Airbnb reviews for Castle Dracula. Old world charm. As the host says, the walls of my castle are broken, the shadows are many, and the wind breathes cold through the broken battlements. But we were enchanted. Thanks, Count. Bring earplugs. I was kept awake by the howling of wolves. Host was completely unsympathetic. Just said, the children of the night, what music they make, and crawled out of the window. Don't bother. My wife was bitten by something in the night and has become an undead monstrosity with wanton desires and an unquenchable thirst for human blood. Also, terrible Wi-Fi. Dog philosopher. I am a good boy. I know this because my master says so. But how does she know? Perhaps I only appear to be a good boy. What does it even mean to be a good boy? So many questions. Who's a good boy? I am. I am a good boy. Have you noticed that the farmer has been using the words ham, bacon, and sausages a lot lately? Yeah. What do you think they mean? I'm going to find out. Maurice, I've got some very bad news. Thank you, and thanks for bearing with me in the technical problems.
That's exactly what I want to talk about. So I have known your work for many years now. It's been, and I'm a huge fan of your approach to things. And one of the things that, oh yeah, thank you. I mean, just tonight with kind of the glitches that we've experienced here, I think everybody can relate to it. And you explore those kinds of issues a lot with technology in your work. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your relationship with technology and how you approach it, and kind of what your message is about technology and how it influences us and the role it plays in our lives.
Right. Well, I think probably my views on technology are a lot like a lot of our views on technology, I think, or a lot of people I know anyway, which is I love the opportunities it gives, and it really helps me. I use a computer for all my work, and I share it on the internet, and I have all these people who are seeing my work who 20 years ago would never have got to it. But there's also this awful downside of kind of just too much checking Twitter and too much thinking about how many likes something has got and things like that. So it's definitely a double-edged sword. And when it appears in almost all of my books, it's technology is never completely brilliant. There's always that downside. And I think that's partly because that's where humour comes from. Humour comes from things going wrong, things failing, things not quite working out right. And also from that gap between our expectations of technology and the sort of ordinary everydayness of things. You know, that's the thing I always liked when I was a kid. I loved Star Wars, the film. And I think the robots in that have really inspired. I draw quite a lot of robots in my cartoons, but they're always a bit like the robots in Star Wars. They go wrong, nobody's impressed by them, they're slightly annoying. They're just this sort of ordinary thing which is there, and it never quite lives up to people's dreams for these things, and I guess there's humour in that.
Yeah. One of the things that I think I find really interesting about the way you kind of look at technology is that you insert technology into like a world that we associate with being hundreds of years ago. You kind of, to show the extreme or something, you play with the centuries, kind of to show how absurd a lot of modern aspects of modern living are.
Yeah. I mean, especially in the cartoons in this book, they appear in the Guardian newspaper in the arts and books section, which has a bit of a tendency to be quite highbrow, quite literary. And so the editor of my section actually tells me what he wants a cartoon about. So I'm given a very general theme from which I can spin off in my own way. And one of the fun things to do, if I'm told I have to do a cartoon about Jane Austen, is to think, how can I look at this in a way which is interesting? And quite often that's looking at it through the lens of technology and putting together those two things kind of, you know, immediately sets off some interesting and hopefully funny thoughts.
Yeah, there's a cartoon in Baking with Kafka that I think really nails this well. It's one guy is telling another guy they're like knights or soldiers. He's sending them on a quest to get to deliver a sword to someone, and he's like, okay, but I've made a quest out for you, and they like have a hard time like syncing it, and they have to like friend each other, and it doesn't quite work, and by the end they're like destroyed by the dragon's breath or something because they're trying to like figure it all out.
Yeah, no, it's fun to juxtapose those two things, and also I like, you know, there's also fun things to draw if you're drawing guys going on a quest or robots. It's not just two authors. I mean, some of the cartoons are just two authors talking or whatever, but it's quite fun to find ways of making things unexpectedly visually interesting. Because I'm doing it every week, and because I've been doing it for 12 years, I'm always trying to find ways to look at things in a new way or make the comic feel visually different.
Yeah. You did a cover. Have you done more than one cover for the New Yorker? Did you?
I've done two.
You've done two.
I did a Thanksgiving one and a kind of autumn books.
Like the books one. I was just curious if you could talk a little bit about the process of doing a cover for the New Yorker. I know, like Francoise Mouly is the New Yorker's cover director.
Yeah.
What was the experience like working with them, and how much creative freedom did you have, and how many back and forth revisions? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's such a wonderful thing. The New Yorker still has this, you know, an illustration on every cover of the year, and it's a full illustration, and they are very respectful of me anyway, and I suspect of all the artists who do it. But what you have to do is pitch them an idea in the roughest form you can get.
Did they approach you initially though?
Yes, Francoise got in touch. I think she'd seen my comics somewhere, and I think she likes to use cartoon people for that cover. So she got in touch, and basically I got into this inner or outer ring where you get to pitch ideas to them, and that's like a very exciting moment, just getting there. And then you have to send her an idea in its roughest form, and if that's good enough, she'll ask for more detail. But it's a really, really hard thing to crack, a good New Yorker cover, because I'm used to working with quite a lot of text and with comic panels and with all the tools of cartooning. And the best New Yorker cartoons, covers by cartoonists, still have some of those tools, but you can't have loads of dialogue on the cover. So it's a very subtle and specific type of joke that works.
Right.
And or even joke is like a visual joke or an idea, and I do pitch them from time to time, but it's much tougher, I find, than making these cartoons. And other cartoonists, I know Dan Clowes has done some of them and has talked about how difficult it is to make something that works for that space.
And Adrian Tomine as well.
He's done lots of them, and he's very good at it. But both times, once I showed the idea, there was almost no feedback. Just lovely encouragement.
Well, that's good.
Actually.
They liked what you did.
With the book one, the girl in my cover was reading a book, and they said, could she be reading a Kindle instead? And I didn't like that. I felt like it made it into a different sort of joke, and it just felt a bit less interesting. And so I did it, and did quite often with illustration I do this. I do it anyway to show them that I'm committed and a nice guy, but I said I still much prefer the other one.
Right.
And luckily that
and they
worked.
went with it.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Well, I think it stops you seeming like that artist who's digging his heels in and saying, no, it's my design, I won't change anything. So, because when I'm not doing cartoons, I do illustration work quite a lot, so I'm quite used to getting feedback from illustration clients, but generally with my cartoons I just get left alone to do my own thing.
That's great. So just to describe that cover for the New Yorker was a woman sitting in, I think, her giant home library or book collection.
Yeah. And
she's reading a book.
She's reading a book, and behind her you can see out of a window there's a kind of last leaf of autumn is falling off a tree. And I suppose that's the thing, it wasn't a joke, but it's like a kind of a moment, and the idea of somebody who's so engrossed in their books they've kind of lost touch with what's going on outside, but not really in a bad way. And that one, I think what's visually interesting about it is there's so many books. My drawings aren't, as you'll have seen, they're about taking very simple drawings, very simple items, and putting them together with the words and the text to hopefully add up to something more. And so with that cover, really, there's a girl, a leaf, and lots of books, and that's it. But hopefully the quantity of books it makes it interesting and visually striking.
Yeah. One of the themes that you are constantly going back to is the book or books. Why do you find books to be such a worthy subject of exploration in your comics?
Well, it's a happy coincidence that I got hired to do a weekly cartoon for a literary part of the newspaper. So they were always going to be about books, but luckily that is something I really enjoy. I love to read. And the more I've done it, the more I've just enjoyed making these. I wouldn't, if you'd asked me at the beginning, do you want to be in 12 years' time still doing this job? I think I'd have thought I would run out of steam or not enjoy it. But actually, I haven't. It's still one of my favourite parts of the week is making these cartoons. And I guess just through books, there's so many other things you can look at, like the one you were talking about the quest. That came from there was an article in the Guardian about maps in literature. The kind of J.R.R. Tolkien drawing his own maps at the beginning. So, kind of thinking of his maps made me think of the idea of the quest, and then my sort of trick of thinking what would this be like in the modern world, and then it sort of spins out from there. And in the end, that one's not really a cartoon about books, but it's a cartoon that starts from books. So yeah, it just seems to. I don't seem to have got bored yet.
That's great. Your outlook, looking at your whole scope of everything you've done, I kind of see like these common ideas of a combination of like melancholy and some wistfulness and also some kind of absurdism and nihilism.
Right.
Is that kind of your general outlook on life, or do you find that that's just a good area to mine for comics?
Well, I think it is a good area to mine. Things going wrong and failure and things like that do make for good comedy, but I don't like it to get too bleak. So I certainly don't want to make, when I make a cartoon about technology, I hate the kind of grumpy old man cartoonist.
Right.
In our day we all read Dickens, and now kids are just playing Candy Crush the whole time. And if I ever have a cartoon that I feel is going in that direction, I try and kind of swing it back in some other way.
Yeah.
Because I think first of all that's untrue, and second it's quite a boring cliche.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to balance a kind of natural comedic interesting things going wrong with trying to keep some jolliness and hopefulness in there. And I think I'm like that as a person. I think I do have a bit of melancholy in my personality, but I'm generally very happy. I have lots of friends, and I try and get both of those things across in the work.
Yeah.
I think the cartoons, Baking with Kafka cartoons, it's funny, they're like almost like, because I do each of them every week in a kind of real hurry, because they tell me on a Tuesday what the theme for the cartoon is, and I have to finish it by end of the day Wednesday. So it's basically one day or a day and a half of intense just thinking about the cartoon, not thinking about how it fits into a series of them. So when a book like this comes out, it's almost like a sort of funny diary of 3 years. And I think Baking with Kafka has more pure silliness in it at times than any of my other comics.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that. You did a book a few years ago called Goliath. Are any of you familiar with that? And so that's really, I think, for me, the first time I've seen you kind of explore a kind of longer form graphic novel. It's the story of David and Goliath told from Goliath's point of view, and Goliath is a very sympathetic character, as opposed to being like this horrible monster. You like see that he is like, he's not a bad guy. I loved it. I thought it was amazing. Did you enjoy the process of doing something that was like a longer work, and are you going to return to that format?
I enjoyed having done a graphic novel. That time I didn't enjoy the process. I enjoyed small snatches of it. It was really hard. It was really hard. I suppose I'd made lots of short comics, and I'd self-published lots of things, and it felt like right now I should do a graphic novel. And Drawn and Quarterly very kindly, I wrote to them and said I'd like to do a graphic novel, and they said great, we'll publish it. So that was very simple. And then I was like, oh god, now I've got to write it, and it was really hard. I found trying to find what I wanted to say quite difficult, and then I think half the battle is convincing yourself that the work is not. The work is worth continuing with, and that's a kind of daily battle for me on longer projects. And the battle is not to put it away in a drawer and then it sort of stays there for months and months. So Goliath was hard to do, but in the end I was very pleased with it, and very pleased that people seemed to like it. And I've since then done another longish book. They're still not long graphic novels, called Mooncop.
Oh, that's right.
Which was less painful than Goliath, but it was still harder than this book, which almost happens by accident in the background of my life. Every 3 years suddenly there's enough cartoons for a book. So these ones come out very easily, whereas Mooncop was probably a bit tricky, but I'm hoping the next one is just going to be a joy from start to finish.
Well, I encourage you to continue, even though it is really hard, because I think it's worth the effort. These are amazing pieces of work, and I encourage all of you to check out Mooncop and Goliath, as well as The Gigantic Robot, which was one of your first kind of longer books, right?
Yeah, although it was still pretty. That was a sort of very a It was a bigger book, but it was still quite short.
Yeah.
I mean, it was moving on from telling jokes to trying to tell a story, a longer story, which is a challenge, and I'm totally fascinated by that challenge, and we'll probably always keep making graphic novels, but it's just a bit harder.
Yeah. Let me see if I have another question before we open it up to. I think I covered most of the questions I have. Why don't we take some questions from you all, and Tom can answer them for you.
I'm a comedy guy, so I'm always curious, asking artists what made you laugh as a kid.
What made me laugh as a kid? As a teenager, that's when I really got into comedy. It was a kind of in the 90s in Britain, there was a lot of good comedy on television. So I loved a British TV program, which I don't know if it ever really travelled across here. Vic Reeves' Big Night Out, which was a very silly and surreal TV program. You almost can't imagine how it got commissioned.
Approximately what year was this?
This would have been sort of 95.
Okay.
And it was based around a kind of weird variety show, but it was just totally surreal. You can find it on YouTube, and I think that really set my mind going on what was funny. And also around that time, there's a man named Armando Iannucci who he came up with a TV program, Veep, over here. But he did loads of stuff in the 90s in Britain, including his own TV show called the Armando Iannucci Shows. And they were just a wonderful mixture of silliness and deadpan, and just something I try and go for in my work is kind of sometimes taking a rather silly joke, but telling it with a straight face or a semi-straight face, and hoping that somehow that makes it more interesting or more funny.
Are there cartoonists that you enjoyed when you were younger that had that same kind of mood that you approach today?
I mean, I suppose the people who influence the cartoons in Baking with Kafka, there's an American cartoonist called Michael Kupperman, who makes very silly jokes, which I've always found absolutely hilarious. And he wrote a book about Mark Twain and Einstein, or maybe mainly Mark Twain, but Einstein does appear in it. And I remember reading it and laughing so hard in bed that tears were rolling down my face, and my wife was like, "What are you reading?" And whenever I explained what it was, it didn't really work. You had to read the book. And so he's always been an influence who, when I'm talking about graphic novels, I always forget to mention him. But with these cartoons, he's definitely been an influence.
And obviously, I mean, I see Edward Gorey in here. So you might as well talk a little bit about Edward Gorey and what his influence was on you.
Yeah, no, he was a big influence. When I was at college, I went to college to study illustration. I'd always drawn as a kid, and I drew cartoons to kind of amuse my friends, but I never considered myself a writer or trying to be a writer, or I think I always imagined I'd find someone who could write and I'd draw pictures to go with their writing. But when I saw Edward Gorey's work, it was like a light bulb going off in my head. I thought,
do you remember what it was, the first one?
It was one of the Amphigori collections that was in the college library in Edinburgh, and just the fact that he makes these weird books which aren't quite comics, and he doesn't feel enslaved by having to use any of the rules or the tools of comics. He just takes what he wants and makes these books, and I just loved that they felt totally his, and that also his design sense really influenced me. I really love the idea that with one of his books, I go for this with my books as well, that the kind of journey of the story begins when you see the book on the shelf. It doesn't begin when you start reading it. you've already picked up this weird object and entered into its world. And I love that about him. And, his drawing style, I loved that they were funny, but they weren't drawn with big noses and big feet. They were quite deadpan. So yeah, no, it was his work that made me really think, I can do this all if I try hard enough.
That's great. A great role model to have.
Did you always know you wanted to be an artist when you were young?
I always knew I wanted to draw for a living. And I always knew I wanted to draw. And I think there was a point when I realised, maybe in my pre-teen years, that I remember thinking, if you're a doctor, you don't draw. I can't, because I think I thought I'll be a doctor or something like that, and it was like, adults don't draw, and if I'm going to keep drawing, I was wrong in a way, because you can, but that's what I, at the time, realised, if I want to draw all the time and do what I love, then it's going to have to be a career. And I thought I want to be an artist of some sort, and I didn't really know, and then I realised that actually I wasn't interested in being a sculptor or even a painter. I just wanted to draw all day. And that's illustration and cartooning, so that's kind of why I ended up in that world. And I thought I'd be an illustrator and I'd just be happy illustrating other people's things, which I do enjoy, and is much easier than writing the whole comic, and can sometimes be really fascinating because you can be inspired by someone else's work, but I slowly realised that I did want to tell my own stories as well. And then I almost had to learn how to write and learn how to use words, and that's been one of the things that this weekly cartoon for The Guardian's been good for, is it's like a weekly place to practice and try things out, and because it's not one ongoing story, I can try something which I don't have to do it again next week. I can just do these experiments. So that's been good.
I'm interested in your process. This was news to me that most of your comics come from an assignment. I assume sometimes you're just coming up with a strip on your own, not from an assignment.
Yeah, the first one I read, the apocalyptic thing, was for the New Yorker, but they just said send us a cartoon about whatever you want. So that one was completely.
So what's your process when the Guardian says do something about this? Is it a very different approach from the New Yorker strip? Or?
Not really. I think the lovely thing about being given a theme is it saves a lot of work, because you don't have to do a cartoon about anything in the world,
right,
which is a difficult place to start. It's like there's this point to begin from, and it might be something as vague as they've had a piece about Jane Austen, so I have to do a cartoon in some way related to Jane Austen, but they're very understanding about me spiraling off on my own way. So what I do is I always take my sketchbook and I leave my studio and I go for a walk to a cafe, and then I sit and draw in the sketchbook, and just write down all the ideas, lists, doodles, and just fill the page with thoughts. And the reason I don't stay at my desk is I feel there's a kind of impulse to finish things if I'm at my desk, to get the idea, get it drawn and get it emailed away. Whereas if I'm out and about, it's kind of there's more time to think through things and think around the subject. So I'll spend the afternoon drinking coffee and doodling, and then hopefully by the time I walk back to the studio, then something is beginning to come together. And then I work just on pieces of photocopy paper, doodling away and trying to really take the idea from the sketchbook and figure out how it will fit into the shape that I'm, the Guardian cartoon shape or whatever other shape. And then I just work editing and doodling on scraps of paper until I have something that works. And then I'll trace on a light box with a uniball ball pen, to get a neat version, and then I colour it on the computer. So it's all very simple, because I'm not looking to make kind of virtuoso, works of art. They're cartoons, they're to be read, and for me it's about simplicity and readability.
Do you feel that if you were to actually do your doodling and final drawing on the computer itself, it would somehow limit you or stifle you creatively?
I think it would because of my method at the moment. The computer is used for in my head. The computer is used for finishing things, and I like that idea of not rushing to finish things. And there is some. I do feel that when you're drawing on paper in front of you, the work is somehow in our world, and once it's gone through the screen into the computer, I feel like it's starting to get away from me. I mean, the computer is wonderful for colouring and neatening things up, and I have a font of my lettering so I can edit things and change things in for various reasons. But I still like the idea of having a finished drawing which then goes into that world.
Interesting. So you don't hand letter the cartoons, you use a font that you scan in?
No, I do. I always hand letter the finished cartoons, but sometimes what I do is I scan in a pencil drawing, and then if there's a lot of text, I lay out the text using the font, and then I print it out and
do it over a whiteboard.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I like the idea that the lettering and the drawing all comes from the same hand, and it's drawn with the same pen, and it has the same feeling.
Yeah.
So even though it's a bit of a hassle printing out the font and tracing it off again, I kind of feel it's worth it to have everything be of a piece.
I agree. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, back there.
Yeah. Do you feel pressure as part of your process to you to stay away from looking at other cartoons in the week so as to not, potentially have the same idea or be influenced by anything else?
No, not really. I'm quite. I don't show the cartoons as I'm working on them to anyone. The Guardian are wonderful. I send them a cartoon and they print it. They once made me take out the word wanker, which I put in the cartoon. But one edit in 12 years I think is pretty good.
Wow.
So I really just kind of treat it as I'll just do it and we'll print it, and if it doesn't work for some reason, then next week I'll do something different. And people on the internet, a little bit what that Marvello mouse was about. The things people love doing on the internet is correcting your grammar. And even that Marvello mouse cartoon, some people got in touch afterwards, not seeing the irony of pointing out there was a missing comma in it. And they also love telling you about somebody else who has done a cartoon on this theme, which I think sometimes is done with a kind of, not with any malice, but a kind of joy or a kind of enthusiasm. But there is something a little bit depressing when you've done your cartoon and say, oh, you should have a look at Ross Chast. And you think, oh, she's done a much better version of this. But that's life. You just got, and I think if you start thinking about things like that, you lose something which isn't worth losing. So I'd rather take that risk.
Yeah. So should we wrap this up so that Tom can sign?
Sure.
Okay.
Anyone have a last question?
Yeah. One more question?
Hi.
I was just wondering, because I'm a huge fan of graphic novels, if you have some that are like your favorites that you go back to. You mentioned Ross Chast and I love her.
Yes. Well, I loved her New Yorker cartoons. She's probably my favorite New Yorker cartoonist. But then she did this memoir called "Can We Talk About Something More Pleasant?" about her parents getting older and getting sick. And it's just amazing because she's gone from making these perfect little gag cartoons, which still have a weirdness and a darkness and a sadness in them, to making this really beautiful graphic novel, which has everything that her cartoons have, but kind of twisted in a new way. So I loved that when I read it. And I think a lot of people my age were influenced by Chris Ware's work when it came out. I think it was just, at the time, it just seemed so unexpected, and seeing his stuff really influenced me early on. And I know a lot of cartoonists who are around my age feel that, so it's a bit of a cliche to say it, but he is just brilliant, and he was then it was even more stark, his brilliance, because it was it was unexpected and new. And obviously Dan Klaus had been doing amazing stuff for years, and there were other people doing great stuff, but his stuff was really surprising at the time. So I wouldn't. It's not so much I go back and read. The nice thing about comics is you don't need to go back and read it from start to finish. You can just pick it up off your shelf and look through a few pages. And so his work. I don't know who else.
Trondheim?
Sorry?
Louis Trondheim?
No, not really. Sorry, Lewis.
How about Charles Burns?
Yeah, I mean, both Louis Trondheim and Charles Burns, I respect their artistry and impressed by their work. But I don't know if either of them would be my real go back to things. There's a British cartoonist called William Heath Robinson, who is just a wonderful illustrator and cartoonist, and he used to invent crazy machines. Who's the American artist?
Rube Goldberg.
When you guys talk about something being Rube Goldberg-esque, in Britain people talk about Heath Robinson.
Oh, interesting. Were they contemporaries?
I think Heath Robinson was before. He was kind of turn of the century, First World War, Second World War things. And he just comes up with these crazy inventions, but also his cartooning is so perfect that you can always read exactly how they work, and his line is just beautiful. And he was an illustrator, and he worked very hard and did loads of different things, and he's like a real pro. You never see a bad thing by him. So I always love his work and go back to it.
That's interesting. Well, before we end, just one other thing that you mentioned was how you kind of said you like to work with kind of a limited set of visual elements and let it. Are you a fan of Ernie Bushmiller's work with Nancy?
Yeah, I am now. Nancy was not, never made it to Britain in any way that I noticed. So it was only more recently that I've understood how good it is. And I think there was a really interesting. I read an interesting review of an essay, a big essay book about how to read
Mark
Nancy.
Newgarden.
Yeah, which I haven't seen yet.
It's great.
Right.
Yeah. It's good.
And because I almost think, some of almost at the beginning of a cartoon or the beginning of a graphic novel, I sort of make almost like a font out of the parts I'm going to use to tell the story with. And then telling the story is almost repeating those in different combinations and different ways to make this story happen. And you try and make it more visually interesting than a font on a page. But it has some. I like the idea that if something appears twice, you don't. I remember reading How to Draw Superhero Comics, and they said, if there's a conversation happening, try having the camera or the point of view zoom round. And I just thought, well, why? So why not just have, if something is the same, have it again, and having it just then suddenly the tiny little changes maybe mean something.
Right. Yeah, you're probably thinking of How to Draw Comics the Marvel way.
Something like that, probably.
Yeah. Well, Tom, this has been thoroughly enjoyable to be able to talk to you finally about your work, and it makes me appreciate it even more.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget you can listen to this and all our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.